Before there were organized international mafia families, there was a small street gang that reigned supreme over every other criminal in New York City. Step into the Roaring '20s, where lawlessness reigned supreme and the legendary 5 Points Gang dominated the city, leaving an unforgettable mark on the streets. Originating in Lower Manhattan's slum, they ruled with brutality, fear, and respect. So, join us as we unveil the ruthless reign of this notorious group of criminals. The 5 Points Gang was a criminal organization primarily composed of young men of Irish-American descent. It operated in the 5 Points neighborhood of Lower Manhattan, New York City, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Paul Kelly, originally known as Paolo Antonio Vaccarelli, was an Italian-American who established the gang. Notably, the gang included individuals who would later gain notoriety and become well-known gangsters, such as Johnny Torrio, Al Capone, and Lucky Luiciano. The convergence of Anthony Street, Cross Street, Orange Street, and Little Water Street formed the area known as the 5 Points. This region, which is currently Chinatown, was situated between Broadway and the Bowery. During the 1820s, this district became a hub for poor immigrants, gradually developing into a slum area characterized by dilapidated wooden and brick homes, warehouses, and commercial buildings dating back to the 18th and early 19th centuries. Initially occupied by primarily impoverished English and Scots-Irish settlers, it witnessed an influx of German, Welsh, and Irish refugees by the 1840s. The 5 Points was infamous for being a crime-ridden area where people would come and indulge in debauchery, a one-stop shop for all vices imaginable. In 1842, a famous writer named Charles Dickens visited and was shocked by the terrible living conditions and poor housing, saying, "Poverty, wretchedness, and vice are rife enough where we are going now." Catholic immigrants faced prejudice and discrimination from native-born Protestant Americans. To cope with their difficult lives, some Irish immigrants formed street gangs like the Carryonians, 40 Thieves, Shirt Tails, and Chichesters. Sadly, these gangs turned to crime over time. In 2002, a movie called Gangs of New York was released, based on a book by Herbert Asbury. It showed conflicts between Americanized Protestants and mistreated Catholic Irish immigrants from the 1840s to the Civil War draft riots in 1863. The movie depicted riots, crime, poverty, and corruption by political groups like Tammany Hall. As time passed, these Irish gangs became weaker and smaller, and some members joined with other influential groups like the Dead Rabbits and the Wyos. In the 1870s, more Italian and Eastern European Jewish immigrants came to the region. Criminal groups made up of Irish, Jewish, and Italian people fought for control over the area and illegal activities. Paul Kelly, an Italian-American also known as Paolo Antonio Vaccarelli, formed the 5 Points Gang with mainly Italian members. They were known for being very violent and often had deadly fights with other gangs. The 5 Points Gang grew by incorporating members from other gangs like the Dead Rabbits and Wyos. They also recruited Jewish, Polish, and Eastern European immigrants, making their group stronger. Famous gangsters like Al Capone and Charles Lucky Luiciano emerged from these gangs. The 5 Points Gang realized they could make money by supporting corrupt politicians in their election campaigns. They used tactics like intimidating voters, manipulating voter lists, and stuffing ballots. They helped the Democratic Party's political machine, Tammany Hall, stay in power. The only real competition to the 5 Points Gang, at that time, was Monk Eastman's gang. Disputes arose between the two factions over control of a specific area in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. In 1901, a member of the 5 Points Gang shot Eastman in the stomach, but he survived. In retaliation, one of Eastman's associates killed a member of the 5 Points Gang. By 1903, tensions had escalated, leading to open warfare between the two gangs. In a notable incident, Kelly, Torrio, and 50 members of the 5 Points Gang engaged in a prolonged gun battle with a similarly sized force from Eastman's gang. City police, who arrived at the scene, were forced to retreat as the confrontation endured for several hours. 3 individuals lost their lives, and numerous others sustained injuries. Eventually, when law enforcement regained control, Eastman was arrested, but his time in jail was brief, as a judge with ties to Tammany Hall released him after Eastman swore his innocence. People were very worried about the ongoing unrest in the streets. To deal with the situation, Tom Foley, a deputy from Tammany Hall, arranged a meeting between Kelly and Eastman. Foley made it clear that unless they solved their dispute, they wouldn't get any political protection. This led to a temporary peace, but violence returned just after 2 months. Officials then came up with an unusual idea to resolve the situation. They suggested a boxing match between Kelly and Eastman, with the winner's gang taking control of the disputed area. On the agreed day, many men from both sides gathered in an abandoned house in the Bronx. Kelly, a former boxer, initially seemed to have the advantage, but Eastman, bigger and more determined, fought back relentlessly. The brutal fight lasted for 2 grueling hours, but neither man was knocked out, resulting in a draw. Unfortunately, the gang leaders told their followers that the war wasn't over. Tammany Hall's higher-ranking members then sided with the 5 Points crew, withdrawing their support for Eastman and his gang. In 1904, Eastman was severely beaten by a vigilant police officer while trying to rob someone. He was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in Sing Sing prison, located in Ossining, New York. His imprisonment allowed the 5 Points gang to take control of organized crime in the Lower East Side. Kelly's gang expanded their influence to other parts of Manhattan and even New Jersey. The Eastman crew became less powerful after Max Zwerbach, Eastman's successor, was killed in 1908 on the orders of Paul Kelly. Kelly brought a more business-oriented approach and opened a fancy club called the New Brighton Athletic Club. This place attracted wealthy people who admired Kelly's charm. Despite being shot 3 times in 1905, Kelly survived and had to lay low. The New Brighton was closed for safety. Kelly's power declined, but he didn't disappear completely. He moved his operations to Harlem and Brooklyn, focusing on Italian immigrant communities. He even became vice president of the International Longshoremen's Association under his birth name, Paul Vaccarelli, and established his base in Chelsea. Kelly was almost kicked out of the ILA in 1919, but was able to rejoin later that year. He led a big strike at the port in protest of a small wage increase of 5 cents per hour. Major John F. Hyland chose Kelly to help end the strike, but he couldn't get any major benefits for the workers. After that, Kelly used forceful tactics in labor disputes in the 1920s. He died naturally in 1936. Later, the Mafia gangs took over the illegal activities that the 5 Points gang used to control. Torrio, Capone, Lansky, and Luiciano, former members of the 5 Points gang, became leaders of the new criminal groups. They expanded their operations nationally and internationally. When Prohibition started in 1920, bootlegging became a profitable source of income for Mafia families. Torrio brought his racketeering style to Chicago and recruited Capone. After Torrio stepped down, Capone took over and played a key role in establishing a national crime syndicate in the U.S. Click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to stay updated as we explore more on the crime underworld.